Alright, fine. You got me talking about Star Wars again. I hope you're happy. Episode 4 of The Acolyte did just release, so I'm gonna be talking with spoilers for that episode and the rest of the show. Now, I originally made a video earlier this year, actually around the Super Bowl.
Been a while since he's seen a hole that big.
It's game day, baby! I went in depth about why I've kind of been burnt out with Star Wars. I took off like several months without any Star Wars, and I think it was really healthy for me. I made this, however, before The Bad Batch Season 3 came out, and it kind of revitalized my hope for the future of Star Wars. I have been reading a bit more of the books and the comics, then here comes The Acolyte, and boy oh boy, I got seen a lot of discourse about it. Shocker there, yeah. So when I first watched the first 2 episodes, I was tired, I was in a bad mood, and I kind of like hated the show within the first 2 episodes. However, upon the release of the 3rd episode, I saw more people complaining, and I actually watched it myself and got more invested in the show because of the 3rd episode. So let me preface this whole video just by saying the show's fine. I like it some places, other places I'm like, this is not really done that well in my opinion. I'll go more in depth in this, but after the 4th episode, I've pretty much just decided that the main problem with the show is its writing, and that is the root of a lot of secondary issues, but I'll go into depth in all of that. But as usual with anything Star Wars related, I have seen people say the most ridiculous things I've ever heard anybody say, and it's driving me f***ing crazy. The really frustrating thing to me is that so many people are so vocal and obnoxious about the show, but they're nitpicking all of these tiny little details that don't really matter when there are actual flaws. You can provide constructive criticism. I just kind of wanted to talk about that because the show's writing, pacing, and especially the editing are really, really rough, and it kind of really frustrated me and made it difficult for me to get into the show to begin with. I did study film. I went to film school. I'm a writer, currently working as a freelance editor, so I know a little bit about editing. I studied this. This is my degree. Watching the first 2 episodes of the show, I was really frustrated because I knew what the problems were, and I know that I would have known how to fix it, and it's just really frustrating watching something on a professional level that kind of feels like it was made by somebody who doesn't really know what they're doing, at least in terms of writing dialogue, editing. The pacing was all over the place. I feel like it was just really weird, awkward, and clunky. Dialogue in Star Wars tends to be very awkward, but in this case, it didn't really feel like the fun sort of awkward. It was like the really uncomfortable sort of awkward where there are long pauses that you totally could have cut out. Editing can change a lot. You can create a whole different story out of what has been created if you are clever enough with your editing abilities. I felt really frustrated because I couldn't really get into the story because I didn't buy these characters because everything felt so awkward. I kept seeing a lot of people who said that they loved it, which is awesome. If you really like The Acolyte, more power to you. Keep on liking what you love, dude. Like, that's awesome. Personally, the more people that I talk to, the more I realize that kind of agree that there were some things that felt really awkward. If something feels awkward, the audience is going to notice. For instance, the ending of the very first episode. This is like your stinger, your hook that you want people to watch and be so interested that they have to watch the next episode. It felt rushed. We were thrown into this last scene. We barely know where we are. There is a new Force user. He ignites his lightsaber for seemingly no reason, which is pretty funny, and we barely even get May's reaction to him igniting his lightsaber, and then it's done. And the audience doesn't really have time to react. Why, for another instance, are we starting the show with a major character and talented actress's death? It kind of felt like a waste of this new character, as well as a waste of Carrie-Anne Moss. One quick thing I do want to point out is I think the editing and the choreography in the fight scenes so far are all really great. They are incredibly fun to watch. Everything flows nicely. I just enjoy watching it, so I do want to give them credit for that. I think the fight scenes are great. It's just a strange way to start a show. It's not the worst, but there were a lot more glaring issues in simple dialogue scenes, like when Yord is introduced. I know it's supposed to be awkward because it's funny, but it just feels uncomfortable. Like we actually did walk in on a half-naked man. It doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel silly. A lot of this could be fixed with the music. I feel like the music doesn't really match a lot of the scenes. A lot of the ways that information is conveyed to the audience feels very confusing and contradictory at times. The fact that Soul doesn't believe anybody that Osha's twin may be alive until he hears it from Osha could ideally be an interesting way to showcase how attached he is to Osha and how that could be an interesting aspect of his character arc. But the way that it's conveyed feels so awkward, it just feels like he's contradictory to the other people who told him, hey, what if it's Osha's twin? We as the audience are learning all this information for the first time, so it's very crucial to make sure that we understand why these characters have these motivations so that we can get invested in the story. I think it would help majorly if we saw what happened that night that Osha and May got separated, instead of just being told vaguely that there was a fire or that they got separated. We need to see that so that we get hooked into the story and are invested in what happens. I know it's a mystery, but you don't have to let everybody know everything all at once. In the scene where Osha has like a little flashback, we hear some voices and stuff, but we should be able to see she got separated from a twin. That way we know what is driving her through the rest of the episode. It would also help us to more clearly see Soul's motivations and understand that this moment when he believes Osha over other Jedi, it is supposed to convey his bias in regards to Osha because she was his Padawan. You can tell us this information, sure, but it doesn't have the same effect as if we were actually shown that something bad happened, they got separated, whatever it may be. By the time of the third episode, when we actually see that Soul was one of the Jedi who found Osha, it makes a lot more sense why he's so attached to her. I just think that it would have gotten me more interested in his story if I had known that before the ending of the first episode. It's really interesting. It's interesting how things get made, and sometimes things go really wrong, and I think, how can we fix this? Coming back after the fourth episode, it really just hammered home my point that we're underutilizing characters and not giving us enough information about them. Everyone was excited to see this Wookiee Jedi in action, but he's killed immediately right after a big lead up to his appearance. It would normally be a fun twist, but it would be way more impactful, I think, if we had spent any more time with this character other than him growling at Jackie once or twice, which granted was cute, but was not nearly enough in my opinion. Anyways, back to the first 3 episodes. Another question I had in terms of showing the audience information was why we are introduced to May's little sidekick in that bar in the second episode. If you're setting up for a full season of a show, the very first episode needs to set up seeds that last through the entire rest of the season or that come into play later. Even if it's something small and insignificant, it kind of helps to set the larger plan in motion all within the first episode, because then things don't come out of nowhere and completely sideline the audience in a way that feels unnatural to the story. Say I were writing a story about a kid getting ice cream. The whole rest of the season maybe revolves around this kid spilling his ice cream and he needs to find out how to get more ice cream. The spilling of the ice cream would need to happen in the first episode. We need to see that happen. Okay. That was silly. Oh. Just hit myself in the no-no square too. Plain. That's so interesting. Why is that doing that? It would then feel very strange if in the last episode of a show about ice cream all of a sudden had aliens coming down. You need to set the seeds in motion for those aliens in the very first episode. Otherwise, it will completely break you out of reality. Now, of course, something as small as a character being introduced in the second episode usually isn't that big of a problem. To me, it just felt like I barely know anything about May already. I need to know more about her in the first episode. Just adding this here, but my point here is this scene introduces more aspects of May's life that we should have been introduced to so that we know who she is. Even this supporting character is an important part of May's life, evidently, and we need to know that about her. They even allude to the big bad guy and May's plans and all this kind of stuff, so it just feels like very introductory stuff that all should have been present in the very first episode. You can still do that without spoiling a lot of the secrets of the show and without spoiling a lot of the excitement in this mystery. There are ways to convey information about characters without telling us everything, and that's through visuals. I think it would have helped if we got to know a little bit more about May and Osha's backstory, just a little bit, just enough to get us hooked, so that by the end of the first episode, we are invested in the story and really want to continue. We still get a little bit of that because we know that there's a cool bad guy with a lightsaber, but I don't really think that's enough. I think the ending scene needs more room to breathe. Don't just ignite his lightsaber, show us why he's bad. Show us why we should be afraid of him. How does May feel about him? Is she scared? Is she obedient? I guess she's obedient, but it's kind of hard to tell because that scene isn't really given any room to breathe for the audience, which is the most important thing, is how the audience feels. All of this can be shown with visuals. Again, does he kill somebody? Think about Pre Vizsla's introduction in The Clone Wars. He immediately shoots somebody in the face and calls him a failure when that guy was pleading to him.
Failure.
And what does this tell you about his character, too? He's not just bad, he's ruthless, he's unforgiving, he is very down to business, he doesn't have time for the failures of insubordinates. You can infer a lot about a single person through that kind of action. And dialogue too, both visuals and dialogue work in tandem here. You know that he's a bad guy immediately. Also, what's really crucial here is establishing how May feels about this, because in episode 4 she has a really random change of heart that just doesn't feel like it was led up to at all. So I don't understand her motivations whatsoever. This is just a really random change in character. She could be lying, but instead it just comes across as mediocre writing, unfortunately. Like, I thought she hated her sister and the Jedi, and now all of a sudden she's completely fine with her sister and completely fine with the Jedi, and that is the kind of change that I would believe if you gave her character more time so that I understood why she would just all of a sudden change her mind. It feels really, really random. We barely even get to see the bad guy at the ending of the first episode. In fact, the only reason we know that he has teeth on his mask is because of promotional footage. You can do all of this while still keeping an air of mystery about him. The mask itself is a mystery. We want to know who this masked person is. It's a very interesting mystery. I don't even know if they allude to there being another bad guy besides May. It kind of just comes out of nowhere, and the only reason that I knew that this bad guy was going to exist is because I had seen the trailers. But you can't rely on extra material to tell your story. Theorizing about this show before it came out, I thought that maybe May's character was the person with the mask and the lightsaber. So it's exciting to know that these are two different people, and I don't know who this character is. But I do still need to know, oh, he means business. Don't just show me a red lightsaber. I know that that means he's a bad guy. I get it. Everyone gets it. But for the audience to feel the stakes, show us a little bit more. Give us room to breathe. I honestly think a major issue is the inconsistent episode lengths and the short amount of episodes in the season overall, which is honestly a criticism of the whole industry at the current moment, but especially with Star Wars shows. Maybe episodes should have a set amount of time so that the writers are encouraged to write their narratives with actual episodic structure. I'm not really getting that with any of these episodes. It just feels very lazy. The ending of episode 4 made me particularly frustrated because it didn't feel like this was a planned ending, but rather just got cut off in the middle of an otherwise longer scene because they were forced to make a certain number of episodes and needed some kind of cliffhanger. In other words, they didn't plan the episodes properly and were therefore left floundering for a natural ending to this episode. This wouldn't be an issue issue if you just wrote the episodes to have natural cliffhangers in the first place. Plus, more time would mean these characters are better fleshed out, so we can feel super invested when they do die. It feels like in the age of streaming, we're purposefully ignoring long existing practices in television, like episodic structure and runtimes, and the sacrifice isn't really worth it because each live-action Star Wars show comes across as missing proper structure and planning. Just a thought. I go into the flaws of this show because I love Star Wars and I really want it to be good. I am happy that people are really enjoying this show, but based off of the first 2 episodes, I'm scared that the average Star Wars fan is going to watch it and think it's really bad and awkward and not be invested enough. It's okay if the occasional dialogue or whatever is awkward, not everything's perfect, but it helps when you are more invested in these characters. Watching it, even as a big Star Wars fan, I didn't feel invested in the characters or the story. I was interested in the concept of the story. Written on paper, 2 twins separated, one's evil, one is accused for the other's murder, or the other murdering Jedi. Even saying that, it would almost be more interesting if the twin got murdered. And then there's a mystery that's more personal to Osha. But now I'm digressing, whatever. I'm just scared that people are going to watch these first 2 episodes and not really be interested. And that stinks because I think that Star Wars deserves a chance to really shine because lately it doesn't feel like it has been. The High Republic has so much potential. This story being told has a lot of potential, but it feels like it's kind of floundering, and that's really upsetting and disappointing. However, all that being said, these are such ridiculous statements I'm seeing said, and I just feel like not enough is being talked about what actually needs to improve in the show, and really for a lot of Star Wars television as well. I've heard people say, oh, it doesn't make sense that there would be fire in space because there's not enough oxygen in space for fire to exist. That is scientifically true. Good job, pat yourselves on the back, guys. We did it. There has been fire in Star Wars since the original trilogy. Since the movies that you claim are perfect and that George Lucas did perfectly, there has always been fire in space in Star Wars. Star Wars Explained even pulled up a great quote from George Lucas where he said that there's fire in space when he wants there to be. It's fictional. It doesn't matter. George often just waves his hand at things because it's not that big of a deal, as long as it's in service to the overall plot. Mind you, this scene plays out very awkwardly, and I think that that is what people want to get at, but they don't know how to vocalize it. The pacing is slow and awkward, and it doesn't really feel like there's an emergency. This is the scene where we need to be seeing more of her flashback. It just feels awkward. Spacesuits in space. Who would have thought? Yeah, there's spacesuits in space, buddy. I don't know what to tell you. I saw somebody claim that there is never spacesuits in Star Wars. There's just suits of armor and it's SEALs. I'm gonna be honest, I don't even understand how clone troopers can breathe in space. You see them put on the helmets and their skin underneath. What is sealing? Nothing. They just did it because they needed it for a story and it made sense and they just ran with it. Of course there's spacesuits in space. What do you mean? The galaxy is a huge place. Just because you've never seen a Jedi use a spacesuit, which we have, by the way, they do wear spacesuits. Just because you haven't seen it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist in this massive galaxy. Do you really just want the same thing over and over again? That is the problem, is that Star Wars fans just want to see the same thing over and over again. And then they get served the same thing over and over again and still find ways to complain. Yes, there are spacesuits in Star Wars. It's okay. It's fine. Who cares, man? Who cares? It's a big galaxy. A lot of people can do a lot of different stuff. Lightsabers having different colors. They've always had different colors. I see people saying that this is more Disney just ruining the canon. Lightsabers have always had different colors since the George Lucas era. If you never played The Force Unleashed, you kind of missed out, but there was a lot of cool lightsaber customization. Yes, there are in-lore reasons that different characters get different lightsaber colors. I actually, frankly, do wish that the lore was better represented, but the problem is that it was never really written in Star Wars to begin with. The plan was not to have green mean that you're close to the Force and blue mean that you're a good warrior. People just made that up afterwards. The reason that Luke Skywalker's lightsaber is green is because they knew that blue would not look good against a blue sky, and the technology at the time meant that blue screen wasn't really advanced enough for them to use it as a lightsaber against the color blue. So they made it green. Samuel L. Jackson's lightsaber exists because he wanted it to be purple, and George again was like, yeah, sure man, whatever, it doesn't matter.
Good guys are green and blue, bad guys are red.
No purple left?
You might get purple.
I love that idea of the crystal bonding to a character, and it changes depending on who that character is and what their personality is. But at the end of the day, the fact that yellow lightsabers existed, they existed in George Lucas's Star Wars. The Clone Wars was made by George Lucas. I don't really understand why people are all of a sudden upset that lightsabers have different colors. The reason that you don't see as many colors in the prequel trilogy is because the Jedi kind of lose a lot of their individuality, and as an order, they're kind of declining. I saw people complain that people were making memes out of Yord and made this cute little welcome to the Yord horde. I think that they are intelligent enough to know that they are making an ironic meme that they know is really silly, but they make it anyways because it's fun. Star Wars should be fun. You should be able to say welcome to the Yord horde without it being the worst thing that some bald, divorced man in his 40s has ever seen in his life, and now he wants to kill himself. It's just for fun. And if you don't like it, you don't have to pay attention to it. It's okay. Yord uses his lightsaber as a flashlight at one point, and people were goofing on that. That is a game mechanic in Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor, where you hold up the lightsaber as you're walking down a dark path, and it lights up everything. That has been used in Star Wars before. I can't remember if it was in The Force Unleashed. I know that I've read it in books, they hold up their lightsaber for lights. That has existed for a long time, and I just don't understand why people are complaining so much about things that have existed in Star Wars. People are also complaining that Ki-Adi-Mundi was in the latest episode. The only thing that this retcons is the original extended universe, otherwise known as Legends now. George never really considered that canon anyway, so it doesn't really matter. People are also saying it doesn't really make sense for Ki-Adi-Mundi to know about the Sith at this time because he claims that the Sith have been extinct. We haven't seen the full show, and he is not there when they encountered the Sith, so it's very possible that he didn't even know about this whole thing happening anyways. We'll find out what happens. I think that the show was obviously made by people who care about Star Wars. It just comes down to the individual about whether or not you agree with the way that they're taking the Star Wars lore and what all they're doing with it. They include Nemoidians, Igarians, Coruscant's levels are noticeably lower than they are in the prequels, which is lore accurate. I feel like they're taking from a lot of cool Star Wars lore, like animation, like books, like comics, that people aren't always going to see in live action. I think that's really cool. Mind you, I felt like their voices didn't match their lips. Kind of a really bad case of ADR. It didn't really feel right. But anyways, that of course brings me to the witch cult in episode 3. In defense of the show, I've seen a lot of people say, well, witches have been in Star Wars before. That is true. I do want to point out that these are new witches. This is a new cult. These are new characters. We have not seen witches of this kind in Star Wars before. Not this specific cult. They are not the Night Sisters. They are not the Night Sisters that we saw in Ahsoka. I will point out that they are kind of very similar to the Path of the Open Hand in the High Republic books. The twins are just like the two sisters in that book as well. One leaves, one stays. Feels very similar. It also feels very similar to Anakin's story in a lot of ways. I'll get into that in just a second. It just kind of gets to the point where nothing really feels original. It's okay to be inspired by things in Star Wars, but you can't just keep redoing the same thing. If you are inspired by something, I think you just need to pour a lot of your own original flavor into it and really run with it in order to change it just enough to be interesting again, and feel more individualistic. Speaking about Anakin, were these girls immaculately conceived? No, I don't think it's the same thing as Anakin. In fact, it's pretty much explicitly stated that their mom created them. Now, in the Plagueis book, which is technically no longer canon, Plagueis and Palpatine took it upon themselves to bring about a change in the Force by increasing the dark side in the galaxy, which had the opposite effect intended and prompted the Force to create the Chosen One in Anakin in order to balance out the Force. You can argue this point several ways. There is the concept that Plagueis intentionally created Anakin by manipulating the midichlorians to create life, which was originally, by the way, in the original script of Revenge of the Sith, but George took it out because he changed his mind. I know that Sam Witwer recently brought up that he likes the idea that people can still argue back and forth about that because talking about Star Wars is really fun, and it's fun to leave that open-ended. I personally think that George, his intended version of events was that Anakin was immaculately conceived by the Force to balance the dark side and the light side. And if Anakin was created by the Force as the Chosen One without Plagueis or Palpatine's knowledge, then it doesn't really matter that these two children were created through the Force by living people. Anakin's still the Chosen One. We've known all along that Plagueis was seeking to sustain his own life through the midichlorians to create life. It just kind of confirms that those secrets were out there, but that Plagueis couldn't find it. Or, since Yoda and Rey can heal people with the Force, that Plagueis just didn't really know how to do it because he was too focused on the hatred of the Sith to find inner peace enough and care about somebody enough in order to create life or in order to heal with the light side. We don't even really know what happened yet, honestly, and I think that this is one instance where that's okay. We don't have to know yet. It's very curious, and these are the kinds of hints that writers include in a show so that you want to find out what's happening. So I actually think that this is very interesting. I don't really have a major opinion on it either way. It is towing the line. It almost makes Anakin feel less special, but I don't mind that much personally because these are not two random chosen ones, and even if they were, I don't think that it's the Force. The Force can do what it wants. I don't really think that negates Anakin's story anyways. It kind of feels to me like May and Osha's mothers didn't even really expect it to happen given their conversation in episode 3 anyways. I've also seen a lot of people complain that the Jedi are being made out to be the bad guys, which is yet another instance of me scratching my head and kind of thinking, where have you been? Dude, that's been Star Wars since 1999. It's been 25 years. Where the hell you been, Loka? The people who complain about the Jedi being made out to be bad guys now are probably the same people who worship Dave Filoni, who, by the way, explains why the Jedi are flawed in the prequels. It's the whole point of the prequels is to show that the Jedi have lost their way, and it always has been, by the way. That's why the Empire exists in the first place, and George has known this since the 70s. That was the plan for Star Wars, was to then go back and show how a corrupt republic was flawed and gave way to corrupt politicians and eventually fascism. It's why the Empire exists in the first place. It's always been an aspect of the entire story of Star Wars that the Republic failed. And if the Jedi are part of the Republic, then in some way, shape, or form, the Jedi must have been complacent in those changes to corruption. This is just the story that George set out to tell with the prequels, and if you have a problem with that, then you have a problem with the prequels, which is okay. Everybody has different opinions on the prequels. They always have. I just think it's silly to all of a sudden be complaining that Jedi are being made to feel like they aren't the perfect good guys, when that story has been told for 25 years now. Yes, they take kids. We've seen that in the Clone Wars. We've seen so much bad shit that the Jedi do in the Clone Wars time and time again. They lied to Anakin about Obi-Wan, made him think that Obi-Wan died. They alienate Anakin. They don't really help answer any of his questions about his feelings or emotions. The Jedi fail. And the whole point of The Acolyte, I think, as stated by Leslie Headland, the showrunner, is to kind of explore how the Jedi slowly enter this weakened state in The Phantom Menace. Mace Windu even says that they lose their Force abilities by the time of Revenge of the Sith. Their Force abilities have been diminished. So something about the Jedi is slowly entering corruption. We're just seeing the slow eventual plot threads for that come into play here. And also, why would you want to see somebody who's just a perfect good guy anyways? Where's the fun in that? I think in order for a story to be interesting to me, it's more fun to see flawed characters because it says more about the human condition. Why would you want to see a perfect little action figure of a Jedi just be perfect the whole time? What does that do for the story? Where is the complexity to that? Where is the commentary on life, on human existence? I get it if you go to Star Wars and it's your fun place. That's okay, but if you don't like the show or what Star Wars is doing currently, then maybe it's just not for you anymore. Yeah, the show isn't really that great. It's fine. It's just not that much to write home about, which is a shame because I know that Leslie Headland really cares about Star Wars. But the biggest complaints that I've seen at the end of the day just make it A, sound like people no longer like Star Wars and they've grown up, or B, and this is the really wild one that I've seen a lot of, is people complaining that there's a lack of white male men in the show. That's it. I just see people complaining about Asians and black people and women and lesbians and the fact that there's minorities at all in the show. I saw somebody take a picture of all the children in the Jedi training room, and he's pointing saying, okay, this is an alien, all of these are women and minorities, there's not a single white male child. Man, I'm gonna be so honest, we have reached like a level of psychosis that is really concerning. I could talk for hours and days about how a lot of this bigotry is getting normalized and it's really concerning. If you like Star Wars and you don't like the direction they're taking, the original trilogy still exists for you to watch and enjoy. If you like the prequels, go watch the prequels. Or, man, find something else in life. There is so much out there. Be with, like, your loved ones. Do yourself a favor and get off Twitter. I saw some of the worst shit I've ever seen on Twitter, which prompted me to say all this. In response to even the concept of lesbians in Star Wars. I'm just gonna go ahead and say that the image that I saw is not okay. I even saw somebody, like, defend somebody who was, like, a convicted bad person, let's say bad person, in the comments just because they hated women. And I was just like, dude, like, it's Star Wars, man. The conception of the children is what's more important. And that's a really interesting concept, and I'm interested, at least. I'm excited to see more about the bad guy. I'm interested in the concept of the story. It's not my favorite thing in the world. It's fine. Whatever. I'll go watch something else that I like. Andor Season 2 is gonna come out. I'm excited for that. Anyways, this era of Star Wars is really cool. To me, it kind of stinks to see the first instance of live-action High Republic era kind of flopping on screen. That sucks, because I really care about this. But it's not a terrible show either. It's just fine. It's okay, man. It's fine. Anyways, I love Star Wars. Yeah, after I saw a bunch of terrible takes on this, I deleted Twitter, I went for an hour walk, and then I learned how to twirl my lightsaber around, so here's a video of that. If you love the Acolyte, good on you, man. Yord Horde, my heart goes out to you. Superfish Films signing off. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, unless you're a bigot, in which case I don't like you. Maybe Star Wars just isn't for you, man. If you just hate minorities, I don't know.